Welcome back, my friends from beyond the screen. I'm Taylor, your casual crypt keeper, and I've got something for you today. Today, we are going to be headed out into the woods to investigate some strange sightings of creatures I couldn't even begin to understand. Make sure you got yourself a full stomach and you're not getting hungry at all, because we are going to be diving into the top 5 unexplained Wendigo sightings that prove they are among us. Now, we've been doing a lot of videos about stuff like this, but you let me know down below if there's a cryptid you got a real hankering for that you'd love to see some top 5 lists. I'm a big Mothman guy myself. Now let's get into it. Number 5, some strange noises. One of the creature's signature calling cards is said to be its horrific wails. Its pained shrieks that don't sound like any animal you'd recognize. It's also said that it's been able to imitate human voices to better lure out its prey. And perhaps those disconcerting sounds were caught on tape as recently as 2019, when a series of howls and shrieks left a hunter and a government biologist searching for answers as to what was going on in those woods. Gino Mikas was hunting with his wife and grandson in northwest Ontario in a fairly remote rural area, about 50 kilometers away from the nearest sign of civilization, most likely an en route. Sorry, rest of the world, that joke is just for Ontario. It's a Canadian cryptid, what can I say? At first, I thought it was a moose, but my mind changed when it screamed again and again. Mikas is an avid hunter, a resident of Sioux Lookout, and knows his way around the woods and what creatures should be living in it. He added on saying, "I've heard many different animals in the wild, but nothing like this. I grew up hunting with my grandfather for the first 12 years of my life. The howls initially came from the distance, but soon appeared closer." We've got the clip, so why don't you take a listen for yourself and see what you think. Now, some speculated that it could be a grizzly bear. However, there's not a lot of evidence for that, since grizzlies don't really live in these surrounding areas. They are known to roam, but there's not reports of grizzly bears nearby. Others speculated that it could be a wolf, which definitely is possible, but you would think that an expert seasoned hunter would recognize a wolf. So, there's a number of people who speculate that this could be the mythical Wendigo caught on tape. And if you're looking for way more stories of folklore, creatures, cryptids, well, you already know what channel I'm going to recommend. It's the one you're watching right now. We've got tons and tons of scary lists just waiting for you to discover. So hit that subscribe button, please make sure to hit that bell so you don't miss a single scream and get all caught up. But do that at the end of this video if you wouldn't mind. I got way more Wendigo sightings coming up for you. Number 4, Southern Ontario sighting. Our next story also comes to us from my home province of Ontario. Makes a lot of sense. It's where a number of regional myths revolving around the Wendigo all originally stem from. Now, this one comes to us from an anonymous Redditor who posted to the Skinwalkers subreddit detailing a strange encounter that they had, possibly with the creature. You take a listen to this. "I decided to take my dog out for a walk this afternoon and not put my headphones in. As we were walking along, I heard a voice calling out my name in a sing-songy way. I stopped and looked around and I called for my dog to come back to me, and he stopped where he was and stared at me for a while and then eventually came to me. I didn't acknowledge it. I walked around a little more and still didn't see anything. Now, I live with my parents, and my mom knows that stories about skinwalkers freak me out. A few days ago, we were having a bonfire, and she hid and tried to call for me in a scary voice to freak me out, so I assumed this was the same thing happening. I continued walking and I heard 'come over here,' and I was so freaked out because this sounded like it was my voice saying it, and I heard this so much more clearly, like it was coming from inside my head. I have no idea what was out there this afternoon, but I can tell you for certain I will never walk out there without my headphones on again. Can honestly say this was the weirdest experience of my life." Now, if you believe the legends and folklore, if you hear the creature calling out for you, the only correct thing to do is to ignore its attempts to lure you away. You don't want to go toe to toe with this thing. You're not going to stand a chance. So it sounds like the original poster in this situation, even though they were scared out of their wits, still made the right decision and got off with just a scare and a story instead of something much, much worse. Number 3, the man in my scope. This next story comes to us from an interview that a YouTuber, Funkalopagus, did with a hunter who thinks he had an encounter with the creature or something else deeply strange late at night. He originally posted this story to Reddit with the name Perpetual Connection, so that's what we'll call him if it comes up. He says he was hunting boar. He was saving up for a while to get a special thermal vision scope. He took it to a range and waited from 10 p.m. to 2 a.m. to find a good boar to bag, but surprisingly wasn't finding anything. And he noted that the area that he went up to was shockingly empty of wildlife, no deer, no rabbits, no coyotes, nothing, as opposed to it usually being pretty plentiful. So he was getting himself ready to leave, assuming it must have just been a bad day, when he heard a crunch come from the direction that he'd entered the park. So he raised his scope to see what it was and saw initially what he assumed was a bear, some big mass on his scope. He zoomed in a bit and jolted when he realized it wasn't a bear, but looked a bit more like a man. Now what was disturbing him was that he was about 30 miles away from any other public areas. And there were no other cars parked around, no wildlife to speak of. The only other living thing next to him was this person in his scope, who happened to be completely naked, twitching and grabbing at all the foliage. The OP then says that the mysterious figure looked up at him and in an extremely unsettling, high-pitched feminine voice began to call out for help. The hunter believed that he was being trapped and scrambled to escape. He said it didn't sound like this voice should be coming from this entity, and he said that the creature was staring at him with a wide smile and unfurled itself standing on its back legs, standing 6 feet tall or maybe more. He pointed his weapon at the unknown entity and warned for it to stand down, and said that it arched on its fours again and hissed at him like a cat before disappearing into the brush, screeching in wail. The hunter would return to his car and drive off in an absolute panic, I think like most of us would, and he would tell authorities what he saw, but he was only reprimanded for hunting at night. I mean, fair enough. If I reported that story to the sheriff or something, I think I as the sheriff would hear that and just, scratch that off, be like, oh, I'm not messing with that. So what do you think? Did he happen to come across someone in the woods who was just having a wild night on all of the substances, or was that a close encounter with death that he narrowly avoided? Number 2, the 2019 sighting. This next sighting happened in 2019. It's the same time as the first point. Coincidence? Absolutely, but worth mentioning nonetheless. This next story was posted to Reddit by a user named Bradley Innovates. Bradley tells about how he had just been discharged, honorably, don't worry, from the Marines and was returning home to his home state of Alabama. Sweet home Alabama, and was catching up visiting on old friends. His best friend Jacob in particular. The two of them had been friends their whole life and usually got up to, boyhood stuff, hanging out in the woods, that kind of thing. The two of them traveled out to a secluded campsite that they'd enjoyed when they were younger, bringing a long arm with them for target practice. The two were chatting and eventually got onto stories of cryptids in the woods, namely, you guessed it, the Wendigo. His friend told him one could summon this creature by speaking its name 3 times into the woods like Bloody Mary. I've said its name like 9 times in this video. I'm speaking into a camera, so I hope that's okay. I hope I'm not cursing you out there. Might be best just to sage your house a little bit after watching this video. Anyway, Bradley played along and spoke his name out 3 times, only to discover nothing happened. Until he heard a snap in the woods, and his reflexes instinctively darted backwards. A few coyotes ran by, and his friend decided that it was enough scares for the woods and started to pack up when a tree began to fall forward towards them. Now, if that wasn't already unnerving, the Redditor said the next thing he heard was the voice of his friend's younger sister calling out to them both, except they didn't bring her along and she wasn't anywhere nearby, and that's when both of them knew they were in far deeper trouble than they thought. They claimed that they saw an emaciated, fleshy monster, deathly thin, with next to no meat on its bones, skin as pale as ash, and a vibrant blue eyes. That actually sounds pretty familiar, to be honest. The men fired at it and ran screaming from the woods towards their car. They escaped, horrified by what they saw, but luckily alive. If this story is true, then that has to be a real-life encounter with the creature. Number 1, Jack Fiddler. There truly aren't many sightings or stories of Wendigos, and indigenous people don't particularly like to share these stories out of their tribes. Despite the popularity on apps like TikTok, it's a pretty niche bit of folklore. Of course, it could also be because there are people out there maintaining the local population. Jack Fiddler, or Zanhano Gahengogawa, was an Ojibwe shaman living in Sandy Lake in the late 1800s, early 1900s. He was renowned among his people for being a hunter of the supernatural, defending his tribe from threats that no one else would be willing. There are many documented cases of indigenous people who, feeling themselves lose control to the appetite or the spirit within them, would request that someone close and trusted would be the one to finish them off. This could be a close friend of the family or a family member. It was an act of mutual trust. Zanhano Gahengogawa claims to have felt 14 Wendigos during his lifetime like this. Of course, not everyone would see it this way. By 1906, word would reach the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, the Mounties, that to them there was this is a quote, "a band of pagans in the habit of killing one another whenever one gets delirious through fever or other causes." By 1907, the mounted police had arrested Zanhano Gahengogawa and his brother Pescoquan for the death of Pescoquan's daughter-in-law. Locals in the tribe decried the decision, saying they didn't understand, and that the man they were accusing of being a killer was a quiet, dignified man who lived with a clear conscience. After 15 weeks of imprisonment, Zanhano Gahengogawa would escape from the police escort holding him. When they found him, he was lying on a rock with a sash tied in a knot around his neck. It was his way out of escaping persecution. It's kind of a sad end. I probably should have ended on like a joke or something. I don't have one. I don't have a joke about that. Well, that's about all she wrote on this one, my ghouls and goblins. Thanks so much for watching. Creep on creeping on, and I'll see you in the next one, so long as nothing in the woods takes me.